My parents secretly handed over the property I bought for them to my entitled sister. I completely cut off all the mortgage payments and watched the bank auction it away. I am 28 years old and I work in the tech industry. For a long time, I thought I had a normal family. I really did. You grow up in a house, you see the way things operate day to day, and because you do not have anything else to compare it to, you just assume that is how the rest of the world works. But hindsight is a funny thing. When you finally step outside the bubble, you start to realize that what you thought was love was actually just a very long, very calculated transaction. And what you thought was parenting was actually just a form of behavioral training. My sister, Haley, is 25 years old. To say we had different childhoods while living under the exact same roof would be the understatement of the century. We did not just have different childhoods, we existed in completely different realities. From the moment she was born, Haley was the undisputed golden child of the house. My parents, Gregory and Barbara, treated her like she was made of glass and magic. She was allowed to have passions, hobbies, and moods. If she wanted to try gymnastics, my parents found the money for expensive leotards. If she wanted to quit gymnastics 2 weeks later because it was too hard, that was perfectly fine too. She was exploring her options. For me, the expectations were entirely different. I was not raised, I was managed. I was instilled with a crushing sense of responsibility from the moment I could walk and talk. There were no hobbies for me unless they looked good on a college application. There was no quitting. If I brought home a test with a 95% on it, the only question my father Gregory would ask was what happened to the other 5%. They made it absolutely crystal clear from day one that I was not allowed to fail. I had to build a solid career. I had to be the rock. I remember one specific Christmas that perfectly encapsulates our dynamic. I was 16 and Haley was 13. I had spent the entire semester pulling all-nighters, studying until my eyes burned, just to maintain my perfect straight-A average because my father had threatened to ground me for the entire summer if I dropped to a B in advanced calculus. I got the grades. My reward on Christmas morning was a firm handshake, a pat on the back, and a lecture about how I needed to start thinking about scholarship applications because the real work was just beginning. Haley, on the other hand, had just failed 8th grade algebra. She had skipped classes, hidden her report cards, and lied about doing her homework. When my parents found out, there was no shouting. There was no punishment. My mother Barbara simply smoothed Haley's hair and said that the teacher probably just had a teaching style that did not match Haley's creative learning process. That same Christmas morning, while I was digesting my lecture on financial responsibility, Haley unwrapped a brand new, top-of-the-line laptop. They said she needed it to help her focus on her studies. I sat there on the living room floor, looking at my perfectly folded socks and the college prep books they had bought me, and then I looked at my sister, who was already downloading games onto a computer that cost over $1,000. That was the moment I began to understand my true role in the family. I was not a son in the traditional sense. I was an asset. I was a blue-chip stock my parents were investing heavily in, pouring all their strictness and discipline into me, fully expecting a massive return on their investment down the line. Haley was their pet. I was their pension plan. The real financial leash was fastened around my neck when I was 18 years old. I had just graduated high school, top of my class, exactly as I was programmed to do. I had been accepted into a fantastic technical university with a highly competitive computer science program. The problem, of course, was the tuition. Even with the partial scholarships I had broken my back to earn, the remaining balance was substantial. I sat down at the dining room table with Gregory and Barbara one evening in late May to discuss the logistics. I had done my research. I had printed out the paperwork for federal student loans. I presented my plan to them logically. I explained that I wanted to take out the loans in my own name, cover my own education, and then pay it off once I landed a job in the tech sector. I told them I did not want to drain their savings. It made perfect sense. It was the responsible thing to do. Gregory reacted as if I had just suggested setting the house on fire. He slammed his hand on the table, his face turning red. He launched into a massive, intimidating lecture about the evils of student debt. He told me I was far too young and naive to understand the complexities of compound interest. He painted a terrifying picture of predatory lenders who would bleed me dry, claiming I would end up paying back 1.5 times the principal amount and that I would be trapped in a cycle of poverty forever. "We are not letting you ruin your life before it even begins," he declared, using that deep, authoritative voice that brooked no argument. "We have $40,000 saved up. We are going to use it to pay for your technical school. We take care of our own in this family." Barbara chimed in, placing her hand gently over mine. "We want you to start your life with a clean slate, sweetheart. No burdens. Let us do this for you. It is what good parents do." At 18, I honestly thought they were throwing themselves on a grenade for me. I felt this overwhelming rush of guilt and gratitude. They were willing to wipe out their life savings just to ensure I had a secure future. I thought, if my father says the loans are a trap, he must be right. He is an adult. He knows how the world works. So I agreed. I let them pay the $40,000 for my tuition over the next 4 years. Little did I know, they were not saving me from a financial trap. They were building a customized one just for me. A loan from a bank is a simple mathematical contract. You pay the principal, you pay the interest, and eventually, the debt is settled and you are free. A debt to toxic parents is a living, breathing thing. It has no fixed interest rate. It has no expiration date. It is a debt paid in guilt, in obligation, and in the total surrender of your personal boundaries. I thought I was walking away from college debt-free. In reality, I had just signed a blank check with my soul as the collateral. The shift in their behavior did not happen overnight. It was gradual, like a slow leak in a tire. I finished university at 22 and immediately landed a highly sought-after position in the tech sector. The starting salary was excellent. It was exactly the outcome they had engineered me for. At my graduation dinner, they were bursting with pride. They paraded me around to all our relatives, boasting about my new job title and my salary bracket. But even then, I could feel the undercurrent of ownership in the way they spoke about me. I was their trophy. Once I started receiving regular paychecks, the comments began. At first, they seemed harmless enough, almost like casual parental advice meant to keep a young man grounded. Every time I visited them or called them on the phone, Gregory would find a way to slip it into the conversation. If I mentioned buying a new pair of shoes for the office, he would say, "Make sure you are saving your money. We sacrificed a lot to get you into that office. Do not go throwing your money away on flashy things." If I talked about going out to dinner with my coworkers, Barbara would sigh softly and say, "It is so nice you get to eat at fancy places. We have not been out to a nice restaurant in years since we drained our accounts for your schooling, but we are just so happy you are enjoying yourself." It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple, and it was their absolute specialty. They never missed an opportunity to remind me of the $40,000. It became the backdrop of my entire existence. The pressure steadily increased. It was no longer just about keeping me humble. It was about priming me for the payout. I felt like a commodity that had finally reached market value, and my investors were getting antsy for their dividends. Meanwhile, Haley was living a completely consequence-free life. She had graduated high school by the skin of her teeth and decided college was not her vibe. My parents fully supported her decision to take a year off to find herself. That year turned into 3. While I was working 60-hour weeks, debugging code until my vision blurred, she was working part-time at a coffee shop and spending her weekends going to music festivals. Not once did my parents ask her to contribute to the household. Not once did they remind her of any sacrifices. I kept my head down and focused on my career. I moved into a cramped apartment with 2 messy roommates because I wanted to aggressively save my income. I wanted to build a safety net so massive that I would never have to rely on anyone ever again. But every time I looked at my bank account growing, I felt a shadow looming over it. I knew the bill was coming. I did not know when, and I did not know how much they would demand, but I knew the $40,000 was just the down payment on a much larger invoice they were writing up in their heads. The psychological weight of that unwritten contract was suffocating. I was a grown man, earning my own living, but I felt entirely owned. The hammer finally dropped when I was 23 years old, barely a year into my professional career. I had decided to go home for a short weekend visit. I was exhausted from a massive software launch at work and was looking forward to sleeping in and eating a home-cooked meal. I should have known better. We were sitting around the dining table. The television was off. The atmosphere was unusually heavy. Haley was out with her friends, so it was just the three of us. Halfway through the meal, Gregory put his fork down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and looked me dead in the eye. His expression was strictly business. So he started, his voice flat and authoritative. We did our part. We paid for your education. We set you up for life. Now it is your turn. I froze with my glass of water halfway to my mouth. I asked him what he meant. You need to start planning to buy a house for us, he said, as casually as if he were asking me to pick up a gallon of milk from the grocery store. We cannot live renting forever, right? We are getting older. We need stability. You have a great job now. It is time for you to step up. I felt a massive lump form in my throat. My stomach completely dropped. I knew they expected something, but a house? A whole house? I had not even been working for 12 full months. Dad, what are you talking about? I protested, my voice cracking slightly. I just started this job. I am sharing a tiny apartment with 2 roommates right now because I cannot even afford rent for a decent place of my own in the city. How on earth do you expect me to take on a massive financial commitment like a mortgage for a second home? Gregory leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I am not saying you need to hand me the keys tomorrow. I am planting the seed. I am putting the idea in your head so you can organize your finances, cut out the unnecessary spending, and work hard to make it happen in the near future. Then came Barbara. She tilted her head, giving me that deceptively sweet, tragic mother look she had perfected over the decades. Connor, sweetheart, you have to look at the big picture, she said softly. We paid for your university. We gave up our golden years for you. Without us, you would be drowning in student debt right now. You wouldn't be where you are. Think of buying us a home as paying us back for everything we gave you. I sat there, utterly paralyzed. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs. I wanted to flip the table and yell, I never asked you to do that. I asked to take out my own loans. But the conditioning was too deep. The guilt had been drilled into my bones since I was a teenager. They were holding my success hostage, using the very degree they forced me to let them pay for as a weapon against me. I did not have the courage to confront them. I just stared at my plate, nodded weakly, and told them I would look into it. After that dinner, I went back to my city, and everything changed. The vague, looming anxiety I had been living with morphed into a tangible, suffocating deadline. I felt like a ticking time bomb. I used my demanding work schedule as an excuse to avoid visiting them. I kept a very fair distance, only answering their calls when absolutely necessary. But avoiding their voices did not make the obligation disappear. It stayed permanently etched in the back of my mind. To meet their insane demand, I had to completely alter my lifestyle. I was 23, earning a fantastic salary, but I lived like I was entirely broke. I stayed in that terrible apartment with my 2 roommates long after I should have moved out. While my colleagues were renting nice lofts downtown and buying new cars, I kept driving my beat-up sedan that rattled whenever I went over 40 miles per hour. I became obsessed with microeconomics. I tracked every single penny. I stopped going out for drinks on Friday nights. If my friends invited me to a weekend getaway, I made up excuses about having a stomach bug or needing to finish a coding project. I ate cheap pasta, rice, and discounted chicken day after day, week after week. I took on freelance coding gigs on weekends, staring at my computer screen until my eyes were bloodshot and my back ached. It was a grueling, miserable existence. I was sacrificing the best years of my youth, pouring all my energy and income into a savings account that was not even meant for my own future. And the most infuriating part was watching Haley through social media during this exact same period. While I was calculating if I could afford to buy name-brand laundry detergent, she was posting pictures from a beach in Mexico, funded entirely by the bank of Gregory and Barbara. She was 22, unemployed, and living her absolute best life, while I was 24, exhausted, and carrying the weight of my parents' retirement plan on my shoulders. I was burning myself out, but the numbers in my savings account were going up. By the time I turned 25, after 2 solid years of extreme starvation budgeting and relentless overtime, I had finally scraped together enough cash for a solid 20% down payment on a property. I was physically and mentally drained. I just wanted the guilt trips to stop. I wanted to pay my ransom and finally be free to start my own life. When I was 25, I finally gave in. I started touring properties in a quiet, modest neighborhood about 3 hours away from where I lived, closer to where my parents were renting. I found a nice, comfortable, single-story house. It was not a mansion, and it was not extravagant by any means, but it was solid. It had a small backyard, a decent kitchen, and enough space for them to be comfortable. We had to figure out the financial logistics of the purchase. I had the down payment in cash, and I had the income to support the monthly payments, but I did not want the mortgage under my name. I was an ambitious guy. I knew that eventually I wanted to buy my own house, in my own city, maybe start a family down the line. If I had a massive mortgage loan attached to my credit profile, it would completely ruin my debt-to-income ratio and destroy my chances of getting a loan for myself in the future. Gregory and I came to an agreement. Because he still had decent credit, the mortgage loan and the deed to the house would be strictly in his name. It would be legally his house. However, I would be the one funding it entirely. I paid the closing costs. I handed over the massive cashier's check for the down payment. And the arrangement was simple. Every single month, I would transfer the exact amount of the mortgage payment directly into Gregory's bank account, and he would pay the bank. To me, this was the perfect solution. I thought it was the least I could do for my parents after everything they had drilled into my head about their sacrifices. The day they moved in, they were ecstatic. They proudly showed off the modest home to all their friends and family, boasting loudly about how their strict parenting and their investment in my education had paid off beautifully. They made sure everyone knew I bought it for them. It was a massive ego trip for my father. But for me, I just felt a profound sense of relief. I thought I had finally balanced the ledger. After buying them the house, the suffocating phone calls stopped. Gregory stopped making snide comments about my spending habits. Barbara stopped sighing about their lack of vacations. They had their prize, and they left me alone. I paid that mortgage religiously for 3 years. In fact, I did not just pay the minimum. I hated the idea of this financial chain dragging on for 30 years. I wanted it gone. So, I continued to live well below my means, and every single month, I sent Gregory an extra chunk of money on top of the required payment. I told him explicitly that this extra cash was to be applied directly to the principal balance of the loan. I wanted to clear the debt early. I figured if I aggressively paid it down, I could be completely free of them in less than 15 years. I thought everything was fine. The gap between us was still there. We did not suddenly become a warm, loving family, but we had achieved a peaceful distance. I stayed in my city, focused on my career, and finally started allowing myself to breathe. I upgraded my car. I moved into a slightly better apartment. I started dating. I thought the nightmare of my childhood obligations was finally behind me. If you are enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment down below with the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps push this video to more people who might need to hear it. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let us get back to the story. Present day. I am now 28 years old. I had just wrapped up a grueling 6-month project at work. I had been working insane hours, managing a team of developers, and I was completely burned out. I needed a break from the city, the screens, and the relentless pace of my life. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine, albeit small, desire to see my parents. The financial tension had been quiet for 3 years, and I mistakenly believed that maybe, just maybe, we could have a normal weekend together. I decided not to give them a heads up. I wanted it to be a surprise. I packed a small duffel bag on a Friday afternoon, bought a nice bottle of wine, and started the 3-hour drive out to the quiet suburban neighborhood where the house was located. The drive was peaceful. I listened to podcasts, watched the scenery change from concrete high-rises to sprawling green lawns, and actually felt a sense of pride. I was a young guy, and I had provided a solid roof over my parents' heads. I had done the impossible. I had paid the toll. I pulled onto their street just as the sun was starting to set. The neighborhood was as quiet as I remembered. But as I rolled up to the driveway, my foot instinctively hit the brake pedal a little harder than necessary. There was a large, lifted black truck parked right in the middle of the driveway. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Blake, my sister Haley's husband. Haley had gotten married a couple of years ago, back when my parents were still living in their old rented apartment. I had attended the wedding, paid for a nice gift, and then went back to my life. I had not seen her or Blake since. I parked my car on the street, grabbed my bag and the wine, and walked up the front path. I figured they must be visiting for the weekend. I was actually a little glad about the idea of a full family reunion. Maybe time and distance had matured all of us. I walked up onto the porch and pulled out my keyring. I still had the original spare house key my father had given me 3 years ago when we closed the deal. I slid the key into the deadbolt and turned it. It did not budge. I frowned, wiggled it a bit, and tried again. Nothing. The lock mechanism was completely different. They had changed the locks. A cold prickle of unease washed over the back of my neck. Why would they change the locks without telling the person paying the mortgage? I knocked on the heavy wooden door, the sound echoing loudly in the quiet evening. I waited for a few moments, hearing muffled footsteps approaching from inside. The door swung open, and there stood Haley. It was 6 o'clock in the evening, but she was wearing a set of extremely expensive-looking, matching silk pajamas. She held a mug of tea in one hand and looked at me with an expression of mild, confused annoyance, like a hotel guest who had just been disturbed by the cleaning staff. "Connor," she said, blinking slowly. "What are you doing here?" I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the weird vibe. I could ask you the exact same thing. I decided to drive down and surprise Mom and Dad for the weekend. Are they out running errands? I stepped past her into the entryway, taking off my shoes. The house looked different. The furniture was rearranged. The tasteful, conservative decorations my mother preferred had been replaced with trendy, minimalist modern art. Haley closed the door behind me and sauntered into the living room, sitting down heavily on the sofa. She took a sip of her tea and shrugged her shoulders casually. "Oh," she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "They moved." I stopped dead in my tracks in the middle of the hallway. The bottle of wine in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. The air in the room seemed to evaporate. "They moved?" I repeated, my brain struggling to process the 2 words. "What do you mean they moved?" "This is their house. I bought them this house." Haley looked at me like I was the one being slow to understand a very simple concept. She rolled her eyes slightly. "They didn't tell you?" "God, their communication is terrible. Actually, they gave the house to me and Blake. We live here now." I felt the ground physically shift beneath my feet. A ringing sound started in my ears. "They gave you the house?" "The house I have been paying for every single month for 3 years. "Yes," she said, sounding completely indifferent. It was as if she were confirming the weather forecast. "Mom and Dad said Blake and I needed it way more than they did. You know we are planning on having a baby soon, right? They thought I should have a solid, safe house to raise my future family in. It makes total sense." I was stunned into absolute silence. I stared at her, trying to find a trace of a joke, a hint of sarcasm. There was none. She genuinely believed she was entitled to the physical manifestation of my blood, sweat, and starvation. She was sitting in the living room I financed, wearing silk pajamas, calmly explaining that my life's sacrifice had been casually regifted to her because she had decided to stop taking birth control. "Where are they?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I did not yell. I did not scream. The shock was too profound for loud noises. I just stared at her, feeling a cold, dark pit open up in my stomach. Haley shifted her weight, looking slightly annoyed that I was not congratulating her on her upcoming baby or her free real estate. They are renting a place across town, she said, waving her hand vaguely in the direction of the city limits. Some apartment complex over by the old highway. Look, Connor, it is really not a big deal. You are doing great for yourself. You have a fancy tech job. We needed the stability more than you did. Mom and Dad just wanted to make sure their future grandchild grew up in a good environment, not some cramped rental. She actually believed it. She believed the narrative they had spoon-fed her, that my money was family money, and family money belonged to whoever complained the loudest. I did not say another word to her. I turned around, picked up my duffel bag, and walked back to my car. I left the expensive bottle of wine sitting on the porch railing. I got into the driver's seat, gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white, and just breathed for a solid 5 minutes. Then I pulled out my phone, looked up the address for the apartment complex she had mentioned, and put the car in drive. It took me 30 minutes to drive across town to the address. It was a massive downgrade from the house. It was a generic, slightly run-down apartment building with a cracked parking lot and peeling paint on the exterior walls. I parked, found their unit number, and marched up the exterior concrete stairs. I did not knock politely. I pounded on the door with the side of my fist. My mother, Barbara, opened the door. She was wearing an apron and had a kitchen towel in her hand. When she saw me, her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flash of genuine panic crossing her face, but it was instantly replaced by her trademark, sickeningly sweet smile. "Connor. Sweetheart," she gasped, opening the door wider. "What a surprise. We did not know you were coming to town. Come in, come in." I stepped inside the cramped living room. It smelled like fried onions and cheap air freshener. I did not bother taking off my shoes. I did not sit down. I just looked at her, and then I looked at Gregory, who was sitting in a recliner chair in the corner, watching television. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice finally rising, the anger breaking through the shock. "I just went to the house. The house I bought. The house I have been paying the mortgage on for 3 years. Haley is living there. She changed the locks. She told me you gave it to her. Please tell me this is some kind of sick joke." Barbara sighed dramatically, pressing her hand against her chest as if I were physically attacking her. "Calm down, Connor. There is no need to raise your voice. We did not think it would bother you this much." "You did not think it would bother me?" I repeated, almost laughing at the absolute absurdity of the statement. "You gave away a house that I funded, without even a single phone call, without a text message, without consulting me at all, and you did not think it would bother me?" Gregory muted the television and stood up. He puffed out his chest, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me the way he did when I was a teenager. "Watch your tone," he warned, pointing a thick finger at me. "She needs financial security, Connor. She and Blake are trying to start a family. We had to give her the house. She did not have the same opportunities you did. We did not pay for her college, so she deserves the house to balance things out." I stared at him, my vision literally going red at the edges. "You did not pay for her college because she dropped out of high school and refused to go to college. You rewarded her for doing absolutely nothing, and you used my money to do it." "You are successful," Barbara chimed in, her voice taking on a whining, pleading quality. "You can always buy another house for yourself later. You are so smart with your money. Your sister needs this. Do you want your niece or nephew to grow up in a terrible, unstable environment?" "I do not care where they grow up," I shouted, the dam finally breaking. "I still live in a rented apartment. I have been living like a monk for 5 years to afford that house, and you just handed the keys to the laziest person I know." They refused to understand the gravity of what they had done. They kept circling back to the same toxic logic. I was the workhorse, Haley was the pet, and the workhorse was supposed to pull the cart without complaining. I realized in that cramped, smelly apartment that there was no reasoning with them. They were completely detached from reality. I turned around and walked out the door while Barbara was still mid-sentence, talking about family unity. I drove to a cheap motel off the highway, checked into a room, and collapsed onto the stiff mattress. I felt like the entire world had just crashed down on my chest. I spent the entirety of Saturday and Sunday locked inside that cheap motel room. I did not go out to eat. I ordered a pizza, drank terrible instant coffee from the lobby, and stared at the ceiling. The initial wave of explosive anger had passed, leaving behind a cold, hard, terrifying clarity. For the first time in my life, the fog of familial obligation had completely lifted. I was no longer looking at my parents through the lens of a dutiful son. I was looking at them through the lens of an auditor examining a hostile corporate takeover. I pulled out my laptop, connected to the spotty motel internet, and logged into my bank accounts. I opened a blank spreadsheet. I needed to see the exact damage. I started pulling up 3 years' worth of transaction histories. Every single month, on the first of the month, a transfer went out from my checking account to an external account owned by Gregory. When we first set up the arrangement, the base mortgage payment was calculated at roughly $1,200 a month. But as I mentioned before, I hated the idea of having this debt hanging over my head for 30 years. I wanted to crush the principal balance as fast as humanly possible. So, I had been sending him $1,600 every single month. I had given him explicit, written instructions via email and text messages that the extra $400 was to be applied directly to the principal of the loan. I crunched the numbers. 3 years. 36 months. 36 multiplied by $1,600. Not including the massive 20% down payment and the closing costs, I had transferred exactly $57,600 to my father over the last 3 years. I sat back in the uncomfortable motel chair and rubbed my eyes. The house was legally in his name. The loan was legally in his name. He had the legal right to deed the property to Haley, even if it was morally bankrupt. I knew I could not sue him for the house itself without dragging myself into a decade-long legal battle that would drain whatever savings I had left. But I needed to know exactly where the loan stood. If the house was Haley's problem now, the mortgage needed to be her problem, too. On Sunday afternoon, I sent Gregory a text message. I kept it brief, professional, and devoid of any emotion. I am still in town. Meet me at your bank branch tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. We need to sit down with the manager and look at the exact remaining balance on the mortgage. Do not be late. He replied an hour later with a simple okay. He probably thought I was going to offer to pay it off entirely to keep the peace. He probably thought the dutiful son was coming back to the negotiating table. He had absolutely no idea what was about to hit him. Monday morning arrived. The sky was overcast, a dull, flat gray that perfectly matched my mood. I drank a final cup of terrible lobby coffee, checked out of the motel, and drove to the local bank branch where Gregory held the mortgage account. I waited in my car until I saw his old sedan pull into the parking lot. He got out, wearing a decent button-down shirt, looking incredibly relaxed. He actually smiled and waved at me as I walked up to the entrance. I did not wave back. I just held the door open and followed him inside. We sat down in the glass-walled office of the branch manager, a sharply dressed man in his late 40s who clearly recognized my father. Gregory did the talking at first. He confidently told the manager that we were there to review the current status of his mortgage loan and explore some options for early payoff or consolidation. The manager clicked away at his keyboard for a few moments, verifying Gregory's identification and pulling up the account details. He turned his monitor slightly so we could both see the screen, and then he printed out a 3-page statement and slid it across the polished wooden desk. "All right, Gregory," the manager said, tapping the paper with his pen. "Your account is in good standing. You have never missed a payment. The current remaining principal balance on the loan is..." He read off the number. I blinked. I leaned forward, pulling the paper closer to me. I stared at the balance. My brain completely stalled. The math was wrong. The math was horribly, catastrophically wrong. "Wait," I said, interrupting the manager. I pulled out my phone and opened my calculator app. "That number cannot be right. You are showing a balance that reflects standard amortization. Where are the additional principal payments? We have been paying an extra $400 a month for 36 months. That is over $14,000 that should have been knocked off the principal balance. Why is that not reflected here?" The manager frowned, looking back at his screen. He clicked through a few more menus, his brow furrowing. "Let me double-check the transaction history, sir." He scrolled down, his eyes scanning the data. After a long minute, he looked up at me, an apologetic expression on his face. "I am sorry, but there must be a misunderstanding," the manager said softly. "According to our records, we have only ever received the minimum required payment of $1,200 each month. There have never been any additional funds applied toward the principal." The office went completely silent. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning unit. I slowly turned my head to look at Gregory. He was staring intensely at the floor, his face flushed a deep, uncomfortable crimson. He was refusing to make eye contact with me. "Gregory," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Where did the extra money go?" He shifted in his chair, clearing his throat nervously. "The records are correct, Connor. Let us talk about this later. Not here." He grabbed my arm, trying to pull me up from the chair. I violently yanked my arm out of his grasp. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. It was a secondary betrayal, so deep and so malicious that I could barely comprehend it. He had not just given my house away. He had been stealing from me every single month for 3 years. I did not cause a scene inside the bank. I let the manager finish his useless spiel about consolidation options, and then I walked out of the glass office, through the lobby, and pushed through the heavy glass doors out into the gray morning air. Gregory was right on my heels, trying to keep up with my rapid pace. As soon as we were standing on the sidewalk, safely away from the bank employees, he grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. "Why would you bring up the extra money in front of the manager?" he hissed, his face twisted in anger, trying to make me the villain of the situation. "That is private family business." I slapped his hand off my shoulder. I was practically vibrating with rage. "Private family business? I sent you that money specifically to pay down the mortgage. I sent you explicit instructions. Where the hell did my $14,000 go?" Gregory puffed out his chest again, trying to use his booming voice to shut me down. "I thought you were sending it for our general expenses. We have bills to pay, Connor. I used the extra money to pay the rent on our new apartment after we gave the house to your sister." I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. I was completely speechless. The absolute audacity of the man standing in front of me was beyond human comprehension. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. "You force me to buy you a house. You secretly give that house to your lazy daughter. You move into a rented apartment. And then, you use the extra money I am sending you, money meant to free me from this debt, to pay your own rent, while continuing to let me believe I am paying off the house. You stole from me." "Do not you dare use that word," he roared, stepping closer to me, his fists clenched at his sides. He was furious that he was finally being challenged. He was furious that his cash cow was fighting back. "I am your father. You did not do me a favor by buying that house. I spent $40,000 of my hard-earned savings paying for your college tuition. You owe me. I do not need to explain to you how I manage the household finances. You sent the money, I paid the bank on time, and I kept the difference to keep a roof over our heads. What is the problem?" The problem was that he did not see me as a human being. The problem was that he saw me as a bank account with a pulse. All the fear, all the childhood conditioning, all the guilt that had kept me trapped in this cycle for 10 years evaporated into the cold morning air. I looked at the man who raised me, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just pure, unadulterated disgust. "The problem," I said, my voice dead calm, "is that the bank is closed. Your account is overdrawn. I am done." I turned my back on him and started walking down the street toward my parked car. He stood there for a second, stunned by my reaction, and then he started shouting my name. "Connor, get back here. You cannot just walk away when I am talking to you. We are not finished." I did not look back. I did not break my stride. I kept walking, pulled out my car keys, got into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone started buzzing in the cup holder. It was Barbara calling. She called 4 times in a row. Then came the text messages, begging me to come to the apartment so we could sit down and discuss the matter as a family. I did not respond. I merged onto the highway, heading back to my city. I had made my decision. I was going to do what I believed was right, and there would be no more toxicity in my life. The drive home took exactly 3 hours, and by the time I pulled into the parking garage of my apartment building, my plan was fully formed. I went up to my unit, opened my laptop, and logged directly into my banking portal. I navigated to the recurring transfers page. I found the monthly scheduled payment of $1,600 that went to Gregory's account. I clicked cancel. A little prompt popped up asking if I was sure. I clicked yes. It was the single most liberating mouse click of my entire life. Next, I picked up my phone. I went to my contacts. I blocked Gregory. I blocked Barbara. I blocked Haley. I blocked Blake. I went on to my social media accounts and restricted all of them, along with a handful of gossipy aunts and uncles who I knew would act as their flying monkeys. I built an impenetrable digital fortress around myself. The first of the month arrived a week later. I woke up, drank my coffee, and went to work. My phone was silent. I knew exactly what was happening 3 hours away. Gregory would be checking his bank app, waiting for the deposit that always arrived like clockwork. It did not come. By noon, the barrage began. Because they were blocked on their main numbers, they resorted to desperate measures. My voicemail began filling up with messages from unknown numbers and burner phones. I listened to a few of them just out of morbid curiosity. "Connor, it is your mother," one voicemail sobbed. "Please pick up. The mortgage is due tomorrow. Your father's account is almost empty. We cannot cover the payment and our rent. Please, you cannot just abandon your family like this." Another voicemail from a different number, this one from Haley. "You are being extremely petty and selfish. We are trying to prepare for a baby here. You cannot just stop paying the mortgage on our house. What is wrong with you?" I deleted the messages and emptied the trash folder. It was not my problem anymore. If Haley wanted a house, she could pay the mortgage. If Gregory wanted to be the proud owner of a property, he could figure out how to finance it. 3 days later, the real test came. I got off work, drove home, and walked down the hallway toward my apartment door. Standing right in front of my unit, pacing furiously, was Gregory. He had made the 3-hour drive just to ambush me. When he saw me, his face twisted into a snarl of rage. He marched toward me, pointing a finger directly at my chest. "You cannot just leave like that," he bellowed, not caring that my neighbors could hear him. "You owe us. We paid for your college. We raised you. Who do you think you are, cutting us off without a word?" I did not shrink back. I did not apologize. I looked him dead in the eye and stood my ground. "I have already paid you back," I said, my voice echoing off the hallway walls. "Do you realize how much I have spent on that mortgage? $57,000. That is $17,000 more than you paid for my tuition. I do not owe you a single red cent." "You are an ungrateful brat," he spat, stepping closer. "No," I cut him off sharply. "You cannot make me feel guilty anymore. The conditioning is broken. I have done enough. I am not paying for the house. I am not paying your rent. I am not paying for Haley's life. You made the decision to give my investment away. Now you get to deal with the financial consequences. I am a human being, not a commodity." I turned around, walked back down the hallway, and took the elevator down to the parking garage. I got into my car and drove to a diner across town. I knew he would not wait forever. He did not have the patience. When I returned 3 hours later, the hallway was empty. He was gone. Almost a full year passed. A year of absolute peace, quiet, and incredible financial growth for me. Without the massive burden of the mortgage bleeding my accounts dry every month, my savings skyrocketed. I was finally living the life of a successful 29-year-old. But back in my hometown, the parasites were slowly running out of blood. I did not speak to my parents, but I still had one cousin who remained neutral and occasionally gave me updates on the spectacular collapse of my family's financial house of cards. It happened exactly as I knew it would. When I stopped making the payments, Gregory and Barbara panicked. They were suddenly responsible for a $1,200 mortgage, plus the rent on their apartment, plus utilities and food. They did the only logical thing a parent in their situation would do. They went to Haley and Blake and demanded they take over the mortgage payments, seeing as they were the ones living in the house. Haley and Blake flatly refused. Haley threw a massive tantrum, claiming the house was a gift to secure her future family, and that it was incredibly abusive for her parents to suddenly demand rent. Blake argued that his name was not on the loan, so he had zero legal obligation to pay the bank. They dug their heels in and lived in the house completely for free. Gregory and Barbara were trapped by their own toxic parenting. Because they had never disciplined Haley, because they had always shielded her from consequences, they were completely incapable of evicting her. Instead, they tried to be the martyrs. They started draining their retirement savings, cashing out bonds, and taking on credit card debt just to keep the bank at bay and keep a roof over their golden child's head. But retirement funds only stretch so far when you are paying double living expenses. Eventually, the money ran out. They missed one mortgage payment. Then they missed two. Then the late fees piled up. The tension between my parents and Haley reached a boiling point, culminating in screaming matches that the neighbors could hear. After 8 months of struggling, the inevitable happened. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. Gregory finally hit rock bottom and realized he could not save the property. He let it go. The bank evicted Haley and Blake, forcing them to pack up their things and move into the cramped basement of Blake's parents' house. The house, the physical manifestation of my stress, my sacrifice, and my ruined 20s, was put up for public auction. Because the housing market had surged in the 3 years since I bought it, the bank sold it for a profit. The bank took what they were owed to clear the loan, and, because Gregory's name was on the deed, the remaining equity was cut into a check and handed directly to him. He walked away with a significant amount of cash, mostly the massive down payment I had originally provided, plus the appreciation value. He more than recovered what he invested in my tuition. I knew it was technically my money, but I did not care. I did not expect a single cent of it back, and I did not ask for it. I considered it a severance package. I had to let it go. At least now, they could never, ever look me in the eye and say they did me a financial favor. The ledger was officially closed. A few months after the auction, Gregory found a way to bypass my blocks. He used a coworker's phone to call me at the office. Against my better judgment, I answered. He sounded exhausted, but the entitlement was still deeply embedded in his tone. He told me that they had used the auction money to secure their retirement and move into a smaller, cheaper apartment. They had officially cut Haley off financially, telling her she had to figure out her own life. I felt a brief flicker of satisfaction hearing that reality had finally caught up with my sister, but it quickly faded when Gregory revealed the true reason for his call. So, he said, clearing his throat. Now that the dust has settled, we were thinking. You have had a year to save up your money. We do not have a house anymore. You should really start looking at properties for us again. We deserve a home to retire in, Connor. We made so many sacrifices for you. I actually laughed. I leaned back in my office chair and laughed so hard my stomach hurt. He was completely silent on the other end of the line, shocked by my reaction. Gregory, I said, wiping a tear from my eye. You had a house. You chose to give it to someone who refused to pay for it. You wasted your opportunity. If you want a house, go ask Haley to buy you one. I am sure she will get right on that. I hung up the phone. I did not block the coworker's number. I just never answered it again. I had my own plans. The money I had saved over the last year, combined with a significant bonus I earned at work, had finally reached the goal I had been secretly working toward. A week after that phone call with Gregory, I walked into a real estate office and signed a massive stack of papers. I bought my own house. It is a beautiful modern townhome right on the edge of the city. It has massive windows, a great kitchen, and an extra bedroom that I plan to turn into a dedicated home office. But the best part about this house is not the architecture or the location. The best part is the deed. The deed has exactly one name on it, mine. I have not told anyone in my family. I have not posted a single picture on social media. I have only told a small, trusted circle of friends I made here in the city, people who have zero connection to my past. I am keeping my new life completely classified. I know from reading enough horror stories online that if my family found out I owned a nice property, the manipulation tactics would start all over again. They would demand to move in. They would demand I let Haley and her new baby stay in the guest room. I am not letting them anywhere near my peace. Right now, my biggest problem is figuring out how to decorate a completely empty house. I have never had to buy my own furniture or pick out paint colors before. It is intimidating, staring at a blank canvas, terrified of making the wrong design choices. But as I stand in the middle of my empty living room, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, I realize something incredibly profound. It does not matter if I pick the wrong couch. It does not matter if the curtains clash with the rug. Because whatever goes inside these walls belongs to me. I earned it. I paid for it. And no one can ever give it away. It takes a long time to realize that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are sometimes the ones who see you only conditionally. They loved what I could provide, not who I was. Cutting them out was the hardest, most painful surgery of my life, but I survived the operation. I am finally free. Am I wrong for letting the bank take the house, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our latest stories.